Okay, so you're on the water. Your buddy is out fishing you, like 3-to-1. You figure out exactly what fly to put on and you try to put it on, but something happens. You can't get that tippet through the eye. Or maybe it's a low light situation. It's a hatch. There's sulfurs or PMDs all over the place. And you grab that perfect parachute and again, what's going on? Is it your eyesight? Maybe. Is it the low light? Maybe. Or could you have crowded the hook eye with fly tying materials? Now, for the first two, I really can't help you out besides saying, hey, bring a headlight, get some cheaters. For the third one, yeah, I definitely have a little bit of hints, some techniques that will help you just to keep all of your materials away from that hook eye so you don't get stuck in that situation. Stay tuned. So the gist of this one is simple. Our goal is to make the hook eye more accessible to us because in my mind, it's one of the more critical components of the hook. I mean, sure, the hook point, hey, that's going to hook the fish. But before you even have that opportunity, you have to get your line through this hook eye, get a knot tied to your hook, and then start fishing. So we're going to try our best to kind of keep everything away from here, or what we do put close to the hook eye, we're going to kind of build up minimally. Let's first talk about this hook, then I'll get to some of my tips and techniques. So I have a Stonfo Cayman vise, and in it, this is called a Scud Hook. A Scud Hook has a slight bend to it, and then the hook eye typically either comes out straight or a little bit down. Now this hook, it's a size 12, so it's relatively standard, though I tend to fish 12 and smaller for most nymphs and dry flies and emergers, then around 10 and larger for streamers. Now whenever I kind of look at the designations for this hook, on the packaging it said 1X strong and 1X short. So let's talk about what those mean. For 1X short, compare this hook to a standard hook and it's a little shorter. How much shorter? One hook eye shorter. That's the 1X part. Then for the 1X strong, that means we're using a little bit of a heavier wire compared to a standard hook. So it's nice to have some 1X strong hooks because they will definitely be able to hold some, we'll say, larger fish, which is all of our goal. However, the downside of them is that there's a little bit more metal there, so they tend to sink. So if you're using a dry fly, I tend to recommend more of a standard or even a lighter hook style just to help keep things afloat. Now for the hook components, we have the hook eye, that's the round part. We have the shank, the bend, the gap is the distance between the shank and the point, and then finally we have the point. So that's our hook. Now let's get to some of my tips for you. Tip number one, this is a simple one. We're so fortunate in fly tying today that we have all these fine diameter threads that we can exert a bunch of pressure on. Gosh, that's a great thing for a beginner to intermediate tyer because you don't have to worry necessarily about threads breaking as much as, geez, I did whenever I first started getting into tying over 30 years ago. So here are some of my favorite threads that you'll find me using on a regular basis. These are the threads that you see featured in my videos because they're the best. And here is the one that I tie so many flies with. It's called a 12-aught waxed thread from Semperfli. The color is brown olive. So 12-aught, that's Semperfli's designation for its diameter, is really fine. So another color that I love in that 12-aught is FL Pink. Again, this is the waxed from Semperfli. It's 12-aught, and let me just show you what this looks like on the hook. There is very minimal buildup with that, yet I can tug and I'm giving some pressure. You can see my bobbin kind of bouncing up and down and my thread's not breaking. Now, can I pull it enough that it will break? Absolutely. But I want you to recognize that there's very small buildup and I can put a lot of pressure onto my thread. Now, another one that we can put even more pressure on is this one here. And this is turning into a favorite for so many tyers around the world. So this is still Semperfli. This one's now 18-aught, so a little bit finer diameter. But you can just read the label and it says Nano Silk under this point right here. The color is black, but Nano Silk is what we call GSP. It's a gel spun poly, and this stuff has just, you can exert so much pressure on it. Now there's various sizes of the wax and of these Nano Silks. 18-aught is just a really nice one because I can get away with tying so many small flies with it and large flies. This is a size 12 hook. You can see there's very little buildup with this black thread. I can really exert a ton of pressure. This hook will bend before my thread will break in the 18-aught, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. So if you're thinking about, geez, you look at your patterns and you realize your thread has been built up too much, those are two great options for you. Now here's another option. This is a crazy one. This is one that's a newer product in 2020 from Semperfli. This is their Nano Silk. Again, the color's black, but if you can read the label, look at that tiny little size there. Yes, you are reading that correctly. It says 24/0. So we have some absolutely just tiny, tiny thread diameters, very fine diameters. Now this is intended more for smaller dry flies, nymphs, midges. Can you use it on standard? Absolutely. So kind of keep all that stuff in mind whenever you're selecting your thread. Go with the smallest possible diameter that you still feel comfortable tying with. Okay, let's get back to another tip. It's a simple one. Whenever I start my flies on my video, you tend to see that I start my thread further back from the eye. For so many people, I see them starting right here at the eye, taking a bunch of wraps, and right there, they already have this significant head that's built up at the eye. So once you add all these materials in going towards the bend and then back up towards the front, and you try to finish, get another whip finish in there with who knows how many turns, you're gonna have just a bunch of stuff occurring at this head. So my advice is to start one or two hook eyes back from the eye. So where would that be on this one? Well, if that's the hook eye right there, I'm gonna go back to about this point right here, make around 5 to 7 wraps, trim my tag end, and I'm ready to go. Now you may have seen my thread just kind of slide back a little bit. That's okay. There's no reason for me to be at the front of the hook near that eye for any reason with this fly. Now there are some flies that kind of demand that you tie them and you're closer to that eye. And if so, then you have to kind of make some decisions. Where do you start if you know you're going to be building up materials there? Those are decisions that you can make ahead of time. And that's something I really encourage you. Be intentional about what you're tying and about the process and the steps that you're going to take. So right now, I'm nowhere near the eye. So let's tie on a material. I'm just going to tie on some Coque de Leon. This is some tailing fiber. I'm just going to grab some around, 5 to 7 fibers. I'm just going to lash these in. I'm not too worried about how they look right now. But watch what I'm going to do here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 wraps. I go to pull them. I'm pulling on them. They're not going anywhere. Note that you can tie most materials in with 3 to 5 thread wraps. By using fewer thread wraps, you're going to build up a lot less thread. Keep that in mind. That's a great thing. Also, when it's possible, get those butt fibers away from your hook eye. There's no way I want to get back up to this hook eye, start to lash this down. I'm going to have all those fibers there and say, how do I get rid of those? So we'll say kind of a smarter idea for tying in a tail. I don't want any of those fibers to come near there. So maybe I would instead, before I even lash these fibers in, I would come in, trim them, measure where they got to go, and if they have to be tied in to the point where my thread isn't back far enough yet, then I could have tied my thread in at a different location, or I can simply wind it back, now determine where my tailing fibers are going to go, lock them in place. There's 4 wraps, and now I'm ready to continue this pattern. You can also notice those butt fibers, they are going nowhere near the eye. They're not going to contribute to any buildup. So that's something that it takes time. It's really easy to do, to just get a lot of thread wraps to get these materials built up and to keep their butt ends by your hook eye. But be intentional about that stuff. Keep them away. Let's continue on into my second tip. And for this one, I've changed the hook in my vise. This one is now Honik H390BL. This is called a clink hammer style hook. And it's similar to a Scud Hook, but if you take a peek at it, it's placed in my vise, I'm gonna use air quotes, correctly, because my point's relatively on plane in a sense, or it's, I guess I should say it's parallel to the floor. I have this nice bend to it, but then my eye comes down. Right now the hook eye is facing down. Just kind of plant that in your memory. And now let's just tie a generic pattern. We'll use some of the other tips that I've already shared. I'm going to use a fine diameter thread. This is 18/0 Semperfli waxed. I'm going to start my thread a few wraps back from the hook eye. Okay, get rid of my tag end. I'm going to grab just a material. Let me see what I have lying around. How about this? This is Semperfli Dirty Bug Yarn. This stuff is nasty. I really love this stuff for emergers and nymphs. Colors olive caddis. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen a bunch of flies I've shared already with this. So with this material, let's take a look at it. This is a little bit different than those CDL tails that I previously showed you. Because if I go to tie this stuff in just with a couple say loose reps, and I try to pull it, it's not going to slide through and leave me just a nice, pretty tag end. In fact, look at this. It's pulling all of my stuff because the material is a little bit more of an aggressive material. So what's that mean? Well, it means we have a couple options. We can take our scissors, snip the end, make sure it's relatively flush, get a little saliva, can kind of moisten the tips, and after doing so, it's going to be a little bit more manageable to tie in and to tighten, I guess we'll say, relatively flush. Now I don't have that much excess. I can always cover it with thread wraps later on or with a material or a thorax material. When you're also dealing with kind of materials like this that are a little bit more wily, kind of like chenilles in a sense, another easy move here is just to lock them in place, 3 to 5 wraps, leave a little bit of excess, grab your scissors, and trim them away. Now, let me give you a little half tip here. Get a pair of scissors with very fine tips. It really makes a difference, at least for my tying. Now these scissors, you can probably see the logo right there. The brand is called Renowned. This is the Fly Tire Supercut. These are just incredible scissors. I've been using these for, gosh, it's early, or I guess late 2020, early 2021 right now, and I've been using these since the spring of 2020. Really love these scissors. I won't go into the details of why, but what I will say is get some quality scissors. All right, now let me continue on. So let's just lock this in place. So I'm just gonna wrap back. We'll pretend we're gonna use this like an abdomen or a body. Wind back forward. I'm not gonna worry too much about building up a taper. But now let's just say, all right, I'm ready to start winding my material forward. All right, let's take a look at what happens whenever I just start bringing this forward, kind of like a chenille. Watch the thread. As I'm wrapping this, my thread is jumping forward. It's jumping away, and now my thread is going over my eye. That's not good. By going over my eye like that, by the time I get this material wherever I want it, and I try to wrap back, this thread's gonna naturally wanna pull it towards the hook eye. So we have a few things that we can do to fix that from happening. All right, let me unwrap this. So the first thing we can do, let's see if I can get my thread back. Say I want to finish that material right here. Well, I can simply put a half hitch in place with my thread. Now, if you're using, we'll say, a thicker diameter threads, I don't recommend that because you're going to build up that area with more thread. Now, because this is a very fine thread, it's 18/0, it's not going to build up much at all. So that's one option. The second option is kind of an obvious one, but not so much. It's simply take your hook out and adjust it in your vise. As I said before, I had the hook in and I said air quotes correctly in my vise. There's no fly tying Bible that tells you exactly where you have to place this hook within your jaws. It's completely up to you. Now, you don't want to put them by the edges of the jaws. It's going to go pinging out of there. I've had that happen before, but I know of many tyers who put their flies in and they put their hooks in their vise and it just doesn't look right to me, but it's comfortable for them. I know many tyers who actually take their vise and they have it facing, we'll say the jaws are facing the camera away from the tire. I've seen other tyers who have the jaws face them. In some cases, that's for a specific pattern. In others, it's just because they're comfortable or they learn that way. But now you can look at how my thread's resting. It's going to be resting straight down from that point. It's not going to want to jump over the eye as much. Will it still? Yeah, absolutely, if I hit it. But now I have it locked in place and it's hanging. So those quick tips, put a half hitch in or adjust your hook so it's just in that right position. All right, so let's bring this material forward. All right, now where my thread is hanging, that's approximately where I would kind of tie this stuff off. And then I would build up a thorax. So imagine it looking kind of like that. But come on, this is a video about, crowding the head. So let's crowd the head. I'm just gonna continue to wind. I'm gonna try to build this up so I almost can't see my eye. All right, so it's almost like this. So now I'm gonna try to lock this in place, and I really got a lot of stuff kind of jamming that eye right now. So I have it there. All right, so here's kind of a simple tip. When my material is that close to the eye and I'm getting ready to tie it off, before I tie anything off, don't put a half hitch in, don't put a whip finish. See if you can simply grab that material and with your fingertips, wiggle and push them back. And then grab your thumbnail and kind of push that material and slide it back. Now, if you've done a pretty good job tying this in, it may be kind of difficult. So this is where you could potentially turn to a tool. By a tool, you probably have one already sitting on your vise or your bench that's meant to do this. You probably have a half hitch tool. Now this is a whip finisher by Stonfo, but at the base of it is that little hole in this tube. And that's a half hitch tool. But you can also use it to kind of push deer hair back, and in this case, to push materials further back from the eye. Say you don't have that tool. Go around your house. I'm sure you have probably one of those pen drawers like my family. Find a pen with a very narrow hole and use that as well. So those are a couple other options you can do to kind of get stuff away from the head. Now let's get rid of this material. So I'll just trim it close. Now I'll put in my whip finish. And if you remember, I had mentioned before, don't whip finish it yet before moving it, because once you have a whip finish in and you start jamming it with your thumbnail, sometimes your thumbnail will simply cut that thread and it will just ruin that knot and everything will come unraveled. But if your thread's still attached, it seems like when I've done that and when it's cut, it's always cut thread that's already wrapped, not my standing thread. So that's my recommendation there. But now let's kind of finish this fly. And when I finish flies, I tend to use super glue on them. This is Zap-A-Gap. What I love about this one is that it comes with a brush. So I'm just going to take that brush, get the excess, dab the excess off inside the container, place a little super glue on my thread, go to around, a 4 to 6 turn whip finish, and finish it off. Now at this point, let's trim and we are good to go. But let's just say maybe you don't want to use super glue. Maybe you want to go another route. Well, let me show you what we can do. Another common method, or we'll say another common adhesive used to seal your fly is head cement. So I have a little bottle of head cement here. I'm going to grab my bodkin, dip it in, and can you use your bodkin and apply it to your thread? Absolutely, but there are many times that maybe you're trying to cure some thread wraps, you want them to have a glossy finish, or maybe you just simply prefer to place your head cement on this way. I'm just going to take my bodkin and I'm going to place it all over that thread, but you can notice I'm going to be a little sloppy when doing this intentionally. Let's pretend I wear cheaters, but I forgot them, and I got head cement all over the eye of the hook. Now maybe I can see that, maybe I can't. We do have some options. Let's just say maybe you're on the water, you realize you're not getting your tippet through. One common remedy could be to grab another hook and place that hook point through that eye just to see if that will naturally clear it. But one thing that you can absolutely do when you're at your bench, look around your tying bench. You probably have a bunch of feathers around yours just like I do. So here's we'll say a tip of a grizzly feather. This is a grizzly hackle. I just stripped off a number of fibers at the base, and now it's just leaving a little section exposed. I can place the stem of this grizzly hackle through my eye and then pull it through, cleaning the eye. The larger the eye, the larger the feather that you use. If we're talking about something like a streamer, then you can absolutely use maybe even a piece of marabou if you need to. Now the other kind of little tip that I will give you, aside from using, I think I showed you super glue and then head cement, another really popular method of curing right now is using a UV resin. Except whenever you're using a UV resin, we have a tendency to place that UV and just cure it with a flashlight. And sometimes those UVs, they have a tendency just to move, one way or another, or fall a little bit with gravity, especially when we're building them up. So do we have a solution for that? Yeah, absolutely. We can use something like painter's tape. I have some painter's tape right here. What's nice about painter's tape, or basically any safe release style of tape, is that you're going to put it on there and it's not going to leave a residue. So basically, if I don't want to get any UV resin on my eye, I can just wrap some tape around it, just around the eye, not around me. Apply my resin after I finish my pattern, then whenever I'm ready, simply pull that tape off and my eye will still be clear. Now, have I heard of stories of people that really have problems with their eye and they place tape at the beginning of their pattern just to make sure they stay away from that? I have. Do I recommend it for others? It's really up to you based on your needs. All right, I placed that original pattern back into my vise, and now let's get on to this kind of last tip, even though I feel like I've been sprinkling them along the way. Well, my last tip is kind of a twofold tip. Number one, whenever you look through any of my fly boxes, particularly those with Euro nymphs, and that's if I let you look through it, what I really hope that you'll be able to see is that I follow this thing that we call proportions, which means maybe my tails are all the same lengths on a size 16. The bodies or the abdomen are all the same. All of my thoraxes have approximately 2 to 3 turns of dubbing. And if I look down a row, it should look pretty consistent the whole way around. And that's one thing that we look for in fly tying. It's consistency with our proportions. Now, are there certain tails that should be longer than others? Absolutely. But whenever we think about proportions, how do we get them? We can say that there's a general guide, but for the most part, it's truly up to you. For instance, this is a clink hammer hook. So I tend to fish something like an emerger on this style of hook. And whenever I have an emerger, I tend to have a little bit of a wing case or a wing shuck as my tail. And that wing shuck is, typically about half the length of the shank. So I use my hook to kind of generate those proportions. Whenever I think about my abdomen, I think about that being about, we'll say around 60% of my hook shank should be that abdomen. And then my thorax, I tend to have smaller thoraxes on certain flies. I like, again, 2 to 3 wraps of dubbing on Euro nymphs, but whenever I'm thinking about a dry fly or whenever I'm thinking about an emerger, it may be more like 4 turns of dubbing. So those are some general proportions that I like to use. Whenever it comes to tails of nymphs and tails of dry flies, it really does vary based on whatever species I'm attempting to imitate or just be, we'll say, generalized about. But now this all leads into my last tip, and it kind of relates to those proportions because maybe whenever you're tying a fly, you're basing it on another that you have close by. It could be online. Maybe you have your computer in front of you and you can pull up that image and look back and forth as you tie. Or you have one that you can physically hold up next to your fly and say, am I doing a good job? Does it look the same? But at the end, if it doesn't, here's the best tip I have for you. And I really wish I would have learned this a lot sooner in my tying career. I've been tying for over 30 years. I don't know how long it took me to figure this one out. It doesn't matter if you've crowded the eye or if your proportions are off or if that fly just doesn't meet your needs. Get rid of it. By get rid of it, I mean grab something like a razor blade. This is one of the cheapies at the dollar store. You can simply just use this one. This one has those edges that you can break off. Then get another sharp one. You can use a flexible razor blade, just a regular razor blade, but get rid of the materials. Get them off that hook and reuse that hook. If you do decide to use a razor blade like this, make sure you are safe with it. You take your time. And here's why. I know that somebody's going to comment down below that ugly flies catch fish too. Yeah, absolutely. They do. I will not argue you with that for that one. However, whenever I'm thinking about flies that I want to put on my line, I don't choose those flies that I think are ugly, that I think are poorly tied, that I don't believe I did a good job with because I'll have less confidence in them. Will they catch just as many fish? Absolutely. Maybe they'll outfish something I was previously using. But if I look down a row of flies and I notice that 3 or 4 of them just don't look right, maybe the thoraxes are a little just too large, or maybe they're non-existent, or the tails are just super long, or they're missing, or there's just a couple materials out of place, I tend to kind of shy away from those patterns. And over time, they build up in my fly box. And I'm telling you, I think that will happen for a lot of you watching this as well. So without a doubt, whenever you're looking at your fly and you just say, you know what, this isn't one of my best, I can do better. I can be a little bit more intentional about this fly. Grab a razor blade and do what I just did. Get rid of it and reuse that hook and tie a better one. That will 100% make you a better tyer, and it will help to keep those materials away from your hook eye. Now, I'm not sure if you can see mine. Just from using that super glue, there is still thread that is down there. That super glue really makes a difference. So I'm gonna have to work on this one. But with that said, let's change the camera angle and we'll finish up this video. So those are some tips and techniques that I can help you at the vise to basically keep you out of that situation where you're either frantically or rather calmly trying to thread some tippet through your hook eye and it just can't be done. So try those out and I hope they help for you. If you are more of an advanced tyer and you learn of some beginner to intermediate tyers that are having that problem, by all means feel free to share this video with others. And then most importantly, pause the video right now. Go down below the comments section and leave a comment if you have any other ideas to help out fellow tyers out there, because crowding the hook eye is something that I know I did when I was a beginning tyer, and I'd love to hear any other ideas that all of you have, which I am sure you have many. Well, with all that said, thank you very much for watching this video on how to uncrowd the hook eye. If you'd like to watch more like this, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. You can also find Trout and Feather on Instagram and on Facebook, and I'd love to connect with you in one of those social media venues. If you have any questions or comments, as I mentioned, please leave them down below, or as always, you can email me at tcamisa@gmail.com. Thank you, a special thank you to all of my YouTube subscribers. Just crazy to see just how much continued support I receive from all of you. Thank you, it is just truly appreciated. And with all that said, thanks to all of you for watching this video, and I hope to see many of you soon.